Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Today, we are going to be talking about advertising in Lock SMS system. Jen, who is our normal moderator, is at her own training for some new innovative technology that we're going to be bringing to the table shortly. So in her place, we have Sean Cunningham. He is one of our solution engineers up in our Canadian office up in Montreal. So he's going to be running this webinar for us today. We can give everybody another minute to hop on, and then Sean, when you're ready, you are good to take it away.
Sounds good. I'll give it another minute and we'll hop in.
All right, Sean, go ahead. I think you're good to start.
All right. Well, let's get started then. So today we're looking at the advertising module, also known as the publicity module. And essentially what this is it'll allow you to show different sort of images, it could be animations, whatever it is for publicity purposes on your point of sale, specifically on the customer screen. So we're going to do all of this out of SMS Pro for today. We'll do further versions on ThriVersA at a later date when there's more material around that. But for now, we're really going to focus on the earlier versions of SMS. So the publicity module is really meant to be able to essentially enhance the shopping experience and do maybe even a little bit of upselling. And it's one that's not widely known about. So what we have here over in SMS, make sure that of course, you're logging in a high level, and we'll open up the advertising screen just over here. And stock, when this is installed, usually there's 1 to 3 images that are usually cycling, kind of a carousel, if you will. And normally there'll be either 1, 2, or 3 stock images that are rolling. Most have not changed them, and they're usually generic images or perhaps the logo of the store. But these are actually something that you as retailers have control over. So you can add your own images. You can have it even point to things like websites and so on. So what we're going to do is just explain what we have going on over here. And then I'll show you, of course, a little demo to see what that looks like over on the POS side of things. So of note, this is something that you'll find over in auxiliaries under the advertising section. And then if you need to deploy these, it'll be a little bit different. So normally we deploy changes when it has to do with items and customers and stuff, or auxiliaries if you're dealing with like risk levels and so on. But this actually has its own section, deploy advertising. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If you do play with these, if you do change them around or add some new publicities, make sure to deploy specifically using the deploy advertising to make sure that it goes down to your lanes. Now, what do we have here? The target, we're not going to deal too much with that. The ordering name is really just descriptive. It's just to know essentially what it's called and to keep some sort of structure in what you're doing. The duration is for how long the publicity is there. So for those of you who just have one stock image, you might not even realize that there is a duration. It probably just stays on the same screen the entire time. But for those who have 2, 3, or more, then this duration is what's going to affect how long it shows up before moving on to the next. Now, it's quite simple. It's sequential. So if in this case, I've got a promo over here, then I'll move over to Pub Metro. 10 seconds later, move over to Pub 2, and so on. And then finally, in the form, there's 2 variants of this. It's either going to be Pub or Pub 1. So in earlier versions of SMS, it will just simply be Pub. But if you're in higher version, so version 3.6, you may need to put Pub 1. It's a simple trial and error if you're not sure which version you are in. So now I'm going to open this up to get more details and explain everything that's going on. It's fairly straightforward in a certain sense in terms of what you want to do with this module, showing pictures and whatnot, but it can also get complex depending on how deep you want to take it. For today, for this webinar, we're really trying to keep it high level. There will be a lot of sort of customizations. If you intend on using this, if you intend on having your own specific publicities in your store, then you can, of course, contact us and we'll take that offline to properly set everything up. So what do we have going on over here? You'll notice you'll have things like URL. This is basically saying, well, where is the source material? When you do a publication, so if we take a standard one, you might just have pub1 HTML. That's usually the default that's there, which, like I said, would be your logo and so on. But if you want to call some sort of different page, some sort of different image, then this is basically telling SMS, well, where are you pulling the information? And you'll notice that it's an HTML. So this is actually loading up a web file, which can include an image, which can include all sorts of stuff. For those of you who are familiar with HTML or who know people that can modify that, then you're in luck because that's actually something that you can utilize. So this is essentially saying, okay, your duration, where it's pulling information from, and then you've got things like triggers. So I will get to that in a second. Let's start with something very, very generic. Let's load this up, and we can actually preview what these are going to look like. So now I've got some beautiful picture of some cheese and some sort of charcuterie board. We'll keep that over here. As I scroll through these, if I go to different publicities, let's say this one, and I preview, I will see whatever that image is, and so on. Now, it's worth noting that in your system, you may only have one, but the standard, let's say, out-of-the-box version can actually hold up to 3 images in your carousel that you get to do for free. There is a module associated with this as well if you want to go beyond those 3. So if you want to have 4 images, 5, 50, different slides, if you will, then it'll require a module. But without that, you can still use all of the functionality. You'll just be limited to 3 images at a time. So you'll have to be a little bit more crafty about cycling out whatever kind of seasonal promotions or whatever marketing material you may want to use. So the URL over here is calling, in this case, this image, or it could be some sort of template. There's different things that'll go on. So if I preview this one, for example, maybe not that one, let's go with this first one. We'll notice that this is different. It's not just an image. You've got some text. It seems to be part of some sort of flyer, and we've got coffee and so on. So we're going to talk to see about how we get to these things. Now, in our section over here, generate from template, we won't spend too much time with this. This is something, again, you can contact us to set up for you, but you can have templates that you use, which is where this comes from. So it'll grab information based on if you have items that are in a flyer. And then from here, you can actually modify this. So if I take this template over here, we're going to ignore the edit and generate. That'll be a little bit later that I'll review that. But you've got this edit result. When I click on that, it actually allows you to go into this and start playing with it. Let me go back to that. So this is essentially what we have over here. And we've got some options to insert, let's say, a text box, or of course, you can just go in and make a modification. If I just want to make this flyer, I can go ahead and do that. I can insert images. I can insert and change backgrounds. I can change colors and so on. It's important to note that you can actually do this through the code. So like I mentioned before, if you know HTML or HTML, all of that kind of web stuff, to me, I don't. This is basically might as well be Sanskrit. But for those of you who are maybe more intelligent than I am, all of this will make sense, and it can be modified here. So if you do have someone who knows web language, HTML, you can come up with some very fancy designs and not something as as basic as what I have going on over here. But when I do this, because there is this editor, that means that for those of you who are not as savvy, so people that are a little bit more like me when it comes to this, you can make those little changes. You can come over here, you can decide that if you want to change the font or whatever it could be, you can use these. So I've got these little sort of 2 masks that we have over here where I can go and modify the style. And it's quite standard stuff. So things like what font do you want to use? Do you want it to be bold, italic? I personally think that the most beautiful font ever, Comic Sans, why not? Let's go with that. And if I apply that, we'll see, oh, there you go. It changes the font. Obviously, I don't actually think that's a nice one, so let's go to something else. Oh, even worse. So I can change around my font that way. I can, of course, change around the colors by just double-clicking in here and selecting. You can have custom colors. People who've played with, I don't know, Microsoft Paint should be pretty familiar with this. So let's go with hot pink, and we'll keep it at that because that's what we're going to go with. So if you want to go around, change the colors, change the fonts, the sizes, if you want to go and change background and so on, you can do that all within here. The picture, so here there happens to be a picture. That's something that I can always remove. I can go ahead and change that. So delete that and insert, maybe not a text box, but an image rather. And it can load up certain images. There's various ways actually of doing this. So if I browse images, I can find from I believe by default it goes into the bitmaps folder. But either way, you can select the folder that you want this to go from. You can check out whatever images are there, like this beautiful lobster tail. And there we go. We pop that in. So not to spend too much time on this, but it's just to say that at least as a starting point, this is something that most people can play around with to get something that they like. Now I'm going to close this and just reset it real quick. Let's not save that. So again, if I go into any of these pubs, I can preview the result, see if it looks okay. If I want to make those modifications, I would go to Edit Result. And that will allow me to go and make whichever changes, go and insert whatever pictures I want, resize them, change around the prices, depending on what we have going on. So for example, if I decided that this was actually some sort of, Starbucks special skinny non-fat caramel macchiato, I could go ahead and put that in there. Let's just do that something simple, change the price over, and then this is eventually what's going to show up on my screen. And we'll save that just for fun. Now, part of this template, it's actually something that pre-existed, and I will come back to that a little bit later. But before we do that, yeah, sure, let's save this. Let's go back and look at some of the other things that we have going on. So if I look at some of these other ones that I have here, we see that some of them are just straight images that exist. This, I can go ahead and modify that a little bit later. But there are some of them that are not just straight images, but actually animations. So you're not restricted to just a static image. In this case, I've actually got a GIF or GIF, depending on how you prefer to pronounce it. And this is something that I might have to advertise a very specific product or a specific promotion. So if you've got, a little more fancy of a marketing team, you can put together these sorts of animations, or it could even point towards a website. What's very interesting about this kind of thing is that you can actually have it trigger based on an item or a department or a sub-department in a transaction. So this is where the upselling comes in. So it's not just your standard marketing, but you're really saying, well, if a customer purchases a certain item, we want this specific publicity to trigger. So if I go down to another one, we'll see that over here, I've got the classic Santa with the Coca-Cola going on over there. So it's essentially saying that when I buy a certain type of item, in this case, we've got this code, which is presumably Coca-Cola. When I purchase this item, then this ad will trigger. So it's basically letting someone know that it's a 2-for-1 that's going on. Now, in this case, I realize I've got some French going on. As Christina mentioned, I'm from the Canadian division, so a little bit bilingual over there. But this is kind of where it starts becoming very interesting, because you can push certain products, you can push certain departments and have it dynamically generating on the POS. So let's take a look at this real quick, and then we'll come back to see some other stuff. Let's see what this looks like in practice. So if I load up my POS, I will just load up the advertising screen in a separate window. So we notice over here that you've got, and you can see the changes I did over there as well, the skinny non-fat caramel macchiato with soy milk or whatever it is at an appropriate price of $31. When I click, let's say the coffee, it brings me right back to that ad. When I click on the Coca-Cola, similarly, it brings up that ad that I had before. So keep in mind, the image that you see over here is what your customer sees. So it is the customer display, that sort of top left portion of the screen that displays this information. When you're not clicking anything, you'll notice that if I leave the screen blank, or if I leave it without touching it, it'll eventually continue scrolling on to wherever it was in the slides. So I had the duration, if I just go back to SMS Pro over here, I had those durations set at 10 for the most part. And so it will continue to scroll through those. It will not stay on the one that you're at because eventually, there's other things that you may need to showcase. But even if it keeps on scrolling to different things, the moment that I go and click on something else, it will point towards whatever it is that's associated with that. So of course, when I click on the popcorn, it's telling me that I've got my promotion specifically for this, or whatever upselling that I might need to have. So that's sort of the power behind it. It's not just the images that are scrolling, it's that ability to really go and select other, I guess, forms of marketing to push that to your customers. So that's handled here with the trigger type, as I mentioned before, as well as whatever sub-department or whatever item that you're pushing. So the two things that I didn't quite discuss had to do with the edit template and generate. And again, for this, typically what you would want to do is contact us, and we can sort of get those set up for you. But I'll do just a quick example of what it looks like to create something like this from scratch. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to load up the item database just to choose an item over here. I'm feeling a little bit hungry, so we're going to actually use this USDA prime beef tomahawk steak because we just passed lunchtime. It's a lunch and learn, so we're going with that. And I'm going to bring back up that advertising window. A second. So we can put some of these things together. Now, if I want to create a new one, I'll click on that plus, just like anything else in SMS, essentially, and let's just call this pub 9 tomahawk. And you'll notice over here, the duration by default is already set to 10, so I don't need to worry about that. If I wanted it to be a shorter duration, I can go ahead and set that to something shorter or longer. And you'll notice that over here, it automatically says pub. But depending on your version, if you are on version 3.6, you might need to switch this to pub 1 to make sure that it actually activates. So now that it's created, what content do I want in here? So let's open this up. Now, if you already know, if you have a website, you can actually plug that in here. If this is pointing towards, it could be your website, it could be a sign-up sheet, or it could be just a graphic, you can plug in the website over here. What I'm going to show in this instance is just that template that I was talking about. And what it's going to do is it's actually going to grab, it's going to use the item that I have selected here, so this tomahawk, it's going to grab this and create a template around it. So as we see that this tomahawk is actually on sale until the end of the month. And so what I can actually do, forget edit template, we're not going to mess with that too much right now because we're not going to play with the HTML, but we're going to use the generate, and we're going to use that to grab this information to create a template from scratch using what's in the system. So I'm just going to use my source price here over in the sale column. It's going to look to see if there's a promotion there. And when I hit generate, you'll see that now it grabbed that item. So I've got that UPC code over here, and it grabbed the template that I chose from. And if I just wanted to check out to see what this created, I see, there we go, weekly promotion available from March 26th to March 31st, which should coincide with what my promotion was. So let's move this over real quick. So as we can see, that indeed is taking from what I have here. It's grabbing the price from my sale column, it's grabbing the start date and the end date. So this becomes really handy. If you start using these templates, then as long as you have something that's maybe a little bit prettier than just this sort of standard blue, you can go ahead and actually just dynamically create these based on what you actually have in your flyer. So it becomes very interesting. Now, if I want to make this a little bit nicer, maybe I would add a picture of a steak. So let's go ahead and do that. So I click on edit. And then from here, as I mentioned before, you can insert images. So let's browse for my images. And I think I've got there we go. That one's wonderful. So let's put that in there. Whoa, size it up real good. This is about the extent of my artistic capability, so we're just going to have to go with that, and we save. So at that point, using the template that already exists, I just created my own publicity based on what I have on sale. And if I really wanted to go the extra mile, I would say that I want this to pop up if ever I were to purchase this item. So if I were to plug in that UPC code and then set my type to trigger based on items, or it could be a department as well, or sub-department, for example. You might say that, well, when you buy other types of meat or something like a spice. So let's say, I think my code 81, if I recall correctly, is a Montreal steak spice. Maybe it's code 82. There we go. Montreal steak spice, represent. I could say, all right, well, when I buy Montreal steak spice, then this ad will pop up showing the tomahawk steak that I definitely want to buy. So again, the point of this is to keep it relatively high level. This is definitely something that you need to play around with a little bit, and then we can work with you as far as the templates and all of that are concerned. But it gives you an idea of what is actually hidden behind the scenes, because often this is an underutilized feature. I know that there are a few that do use it, but usually it's just the 1, 2, or 3 images. But it can go much, much further with these triggers that are here, and being able to dynamically generate those templates based on what you actually have in your database and with what's on sale. As far as the editing is concerned, you've got something to work with over here, being able to just click, change out items, change out fonts and text and so on. But for those who are more advanced or have a dedicated resource, you could get into the actual HTML and start really building out some interesting things. Do keep in mind, however, though, if you are going to be like me, and if you do have publicities that have animations and so on, you might experience a little bit of slowness depending on the size of your images, depending on how long that they last. There isn't exactly a limitation, but it's something to just be cognizant of, be smart about it. If you're pointing towards some sort of website, then there's bandwidth that's being used. If you are loading heavy images, then it's not so much that it'll slow down the POS, but then the images that you might have may be laggy. So typically a static image is what you want to do, but it's to say that you could get more creative in that if you really do want to drive engagement a little bit further. So for today, it's a quite straightforward. The whole advertising essentially is all done within this table. The rest are going to be within those HTML tables and whatever pictures you use, which are things that are going to be stored in your bitmap folder or as well as in your HTML folder. So you can contact us for more information specifically about that. And for everything else, we'll take questions and go from there.
Yep. So we did have one question come in, Sean.
Sure.
With the UPC trigger function, does that work in conjunction with durations, or does that override the schedule?
So if I understand the question properly, when you get a trigger, it'll load this one. It'll sort of skip the line and load back whichever item we have here. So if I go back to my example from earlier, as soon as, so right now you've got some popcorn. Even though it's not done, if I click on coffee, it will switch to coffee, and then it will continue from there. From then on, for the 10 seconds after my coffee is finished, it'll continue on the sequence. So in that case, the next sequence I had here was that website, which is pointing to our little Ravyx logo, but it'll sort of continue the sequence from there.
Okay. Let's give it a second if anybody else has any questions or if there's any follow-up to that question. Go ahead and put it in the chat. Like Sean mentioned, this application is very customizable based on the store's capability and what you guys are looking to do with it. So this was very high level. If there are any other questions, more than happy to answer them. If they can't be, so if it's something too store specific that we can't do on this call, we're more than happy to send it over to one of our techs that can reach out to you and do a little bit of training on it separately with you.
Mm-hmm. As maybe a final word on my part, and unless there are other questions that pop up, is for those who may not already be using this, keep in mind that without any sort of module, you're allowed up to 3 images in this carousel. So all of the functionality itself is not gated. It's really just a matter of how many pubs you have. So at the very least, what you could do is have 2 more publicities that are just simply pointing towards images using the features that I showed previously. Even if you're not using the trigger, just being able to add other images. So just for seasonal content, we've got Easter that's just around the corner, and then, eventually there'll be Christmas and, Halloween and so on. So even just swapping out those images would be already the right step in driving a little bit more engagement. And then after that, it's a bit of trial and error. And you don't need to worry too much because it will not deploy unless you do your deploy advertising. And at least when you're playing around with it, you've got that preview that exists just to see, well, does it look like what I want it to look like? So you've got some stuff that you can play with that's fairly low risk, and it's not gated behind a paywall either.
Perfect. All right, we don't have any other questions coming in. Sean, thank you for being a guest moderator this month.
My pleasure.
Perfect. Next month, we will be talking about loyalty, and that webinar will be on April 30th. So keep an eye out for that. Join us then if that's something that you want to learn some more about. And thank you all for joining us today. Everybody have a good day.